Hello and welcome to the Juliet Hampton Morgan Memorial Library's Teen Talk Tuesdays. My name is Mike and today we will be reading the first few chapters of China Miéville's Lun Dun. I hope you enjoy the show. Chapter 1. The Respectful Fox. There was no doubt about it. There was a fox behind the climbing frame, and it was watching. It is, isn't it? The playground was full of children, their gray uniforms flapping as they ran and kicked balls into makeshift goals. Amid the shouting and the games, a few girls were watching the fox. It definitely is. It's just watching us. A tall blonde girl said this. She could see the animal clearly behind a fringe of grass and thistle. Why isn't it moving? She walked slowly towards it. At first, the friends had thought the animal was a dog and had started ambling towards it while they chatted. But halfway across the tarmac, they realized it was a fox. It was a cold, cloudless autumn morning, and the sun was bright. None of them could quite believe what they were seeing. The fox kept standing still as they approached. "I saw one once before," whispered Kath, shifting her bag from shoulder to shoulder. "It was with my dad by the canal. He told me there's loads in London now, but you don't normally see them." "It should be running," said Keisha anxiously. "I'm staying here. That's got teeth." "All the better to eat you with," said Deeba. "That was a wolf," said Kath. Kath and Keisha held back. Zanna, the blonde girl, slowly approached the fox with Deeba, as usual by her side. They got closer, expecting it to arch into one of those beautiful curves of animal panic and duck under the fence. It kept not doing so. The girls had never seen an animal so still. It wasn't that it wasn't moving. It was furiously not moving. By the time they got close to the climbing frame, they were creeping exaggeratedly like cartoon hunters. The fox eyed Zanna's outstretched hand politely. Deeba frowned. "Yeah, it is watching," Deeba said, "but not us. It's watching you." Zanna, she hated her name Susanna, and she hated Sue even more, had moved to the estate about a year ago, and quickly made friends with Kath and Keisha and Bex and others, especially Deeba. On her way to Kilburn Comprehensive, on her first day, Deeba had made Zanna laugh, which not many people could do. Since then, where Zanna was, Deeba tended to be too. There was something about Zanna that drew attention. She was decent to good at things like sports, schoolwork, dancing, whatever, but that wasn't it. She did well enough to do well, but never enough to stand out. She was tall and striking, but she never played that up either. If anything, she seemed to try to stay in the background, but she never quite could. If she hadn't been easy to get on with, that could have caused her a lot of trouble. Sometimes, even her mates were a little bit wary of Zanna, as if they weren't quite sure how to deal with her. Even Deeba herself had to admit that Zanna could be a bit dreamy. Sometimes she would sort of zone out, staring skywards or losing the thread of what she was saying. And just at that moment, she was concentrating hard on what Deeba had just said. Zanna put her hands on her hips, and even her sudden movement didn't make the fox jump. "It's true," said Deeba. "It hasn't taken its eyes off you." Zanna met the fox's gentle, vulpine gaze, all the girls watching, and the animal seemed to get lost in something. Until their attention was interrupted by the bell at the end of break. The girls looked at each other, blinking. The fox finally moved. Still looking at Zanna, it bowed its head. It did it once, then leapt, and it was gone. Deeba watched Zanna and muttered, "This is just getting weird." For the rest of that day... Chapter 2. Signs. For the rest of that day, Zanna tried to avoid her friends. They eventually caught up with her at the lunch queue, but when she told them to leave her alone, it was such a nasty voice that they obeyed. "Forget it," said Kath. "She's just rude." "She's mad," said Bex, and they walked away ostentatiously. Only Deeba stayed. She didn't try to talk to Zanna. Instead, she watched her thoughtfully. That afternoon, she waited for Zanna after school. Zanna tried to get by in the rush, but Deeba wouldn't let her. She crept up on her, then suddenly linked her arm into one of hers. Zanna tried to look angry, but it didn't last very long. "Oh, Deebs, what's going on?" she said. They made their way to the estate where they both lived and headed for Deeba's house. Her boisterous, talkative family, while sometimes exasperating with all their noise and kerfuffle, were generally a comfortable backdrop for any discussion. As usual, people looked at the girls as they passed. They made a funny pair. Deeba was shorter and rounder and messier than her skinny friend. Her long black hair was making its usual break for freedom from her ponytail, in contrast to Zanna's tightly slicked back blonde mess. Zanna was silent while Deeba kept asking if she was okay. "Hello, Miss Rashan." "Hello, Miss Moon," sang Deeba's father as they entered. "What have you been doing? Cup of tea for you ladies?" "Hi, sweetheart," said Deeba's mom. "How was your day?" "Hello, Zanna. How are you doing?" "Hello, Mr. and Mrs. Rashan," said Zanna, smiling with her usual nervous pleasure as Deeba's parents beamed at her. "Fine, thank you." "Leave her alone, Dad," said Deeba, dragging Zanna through to her room. "Except for the tea, please." "So, nothing happened to you today?" said her mother. "You have nothing to report? You had a totally empty day. You amaze me." "It was fine," she said. "It was the same as always, isn't it?" Without getting up, Deeba's parents started loudly consoling her about the tragedy of how nothing ever changed for her and that every day was the same. Deeba rolled her eyes at them and just closed the door. They sat without speaking for a while. Deeba put the lip gloss on Zanna as she just sat. What are we going to do, Zanna?" said Deeba at last. "Something's going on." "I know," said Zanna. "It's getting worse." It was hard to say exactly when it started. Things had been getting strange for the last month. "Remember when I saw that cloud?" said Deeba. "That looked like you." "That was weeks ago, and it didn't look anything like anything," Zanna said. "Let's stick to the real stuff. The fox today. And that woman. What was on the wall? And the letter. That sort of thing." It had been early autumn when the odd events had occurred. They had been at the Rose Café. None of them had paid attention when the door opened until they'd realized that the woman who'd come in, was standing quietly by their table. One by one, they looked at her. She'd been wearing a bus driver's uniform, the cap at a perky angle, and she was grinning. "Sorry to butt in," the woman said. "I hope you don't. It's just very exciting to meet you." She smiled at all of them, but addressed Zanna. "Just wanted to say that." The girls stared in dumb astonishment for several seconds. Zanna had tried to stutter something in reply. Kath had burst out with, "What?" And Deeba had started laughing. None of this fazed the woman. She said a nonsense word. "Schwazzy," she said. "I heard you would be here. I wouldn't have believed it." With one more smile, she left, leaving the girls laughing nervously and loudly, until the waitress had asked them to calm down. "Nutter, nutter, what a bloody nutter." If that had been all, it would have been just one of those weird stories about someone a bit loopy on London's streets. But that had not been all. Some days later, Deeba had been with Zanna, walking under the old bridge over Iversion Road. She'd looked up, reading some of the cruder graffiti. There, behind the pigeon net, far higher than anyone could have reached, was painted in vivid yellow. Zanna, forever. Core. Someone else called Zanna, Deeba said. Or you've got long arms. Or someone massive loves you, Zan. Shut up. It's true, though, Deeba said. No one else is called Zanna. You're always saying. Now you've made your mark. A little while after that, the day after Guy Fawkes Night, when London was full of bonfires and fireworks, Zanna had come to school upset. At last, when she was alone with Deeba, Zanna had pulled a piece of paper and a card out of her bag. A postman had been waiting outside her front door. He had even given her a letter with no name on the envelope, just handed it straight to her as soon as she emerged, and disappeared. She hesitated before showing it to Deeba. Don't tell any of the others, she had said. Swear? We look forward to meeting you, Deeba read, when the wheel turns. Who's it from? Deeba said. If I knew that, I wouldn't be freaked out. There's not even a stamp. Is there a mark? Deeba said. To say where it came from? Is that a U? An L? And that says on, I think? They couldn't read anymore. He said something to me. Same thing that woman said. Schwazzy, he said. I was like, what? I tried to follow him, but he was gone. What does it mean? Deeba said. That's not all, said Zanna. This was in there too. It was a little square card, some strange design, a beautiful, intricate thing of multicolored swirling lines. It was, Deeba realized, some mad version of a London travel card. It said it was good for zones 1 to 6, buses and trains all across the city. On the dotted line across its center was a carefully printed Zanna Moon Schwazi. That was when Deeba had told Zanna that she had to tell her parents. She herself kept her promise and never told anyone. Did you tell them? Said Deeba. How can I? Said Zanna. What am I going to say about the animals? For the last few weeks, dogs would often stop as Zanna walked by and stare at her. Once a little conga line of 3 squirrels had come down from a tree as Zanna sat in Queen's Park, and one by one had put a little nut or a seed in front of her. Only cats ignored her. It's mad, said Zanna. I don't know what's going on, and I can't tell them. They'll think I need help. Maybe I do. But I tell you one thing. Her voice was surprisingly firm. I was thinking when I looked at that fox. At first I was scared. I still don't want to talk about it, not to Kath or that lot. So don't say anything, all right? But I've had enough. Something's happening. Okay? Well, I'm ready for it. Outside it was storming. The air was growling and rumbustuous. People crammed under eaves or huddled into their coats and shuffled through the rain. Through Deeba's window, the girls watched people dance and wrestle with umbrellas. When Zanna left, she ran out past a sheltering woman with a ridiculous little dog on a leash. As it saw her, the dog sat up in an oddly dignified way. It bowed its head. Zanna looked at the little dog and, obviously, as surprised by her own reaction as by the animal's greeting, she bowed her head back. Chapter 3. The Visiting Smoke. The next day, Zanna and Deeba wandered through the playground, watching their reflections in all the puddles. Bedraggled rubbish lurked by walls. The clouds still looked heavy. My dad hates umbrellas, said Deeba, swinging her own. When it rains, he always says the same thing. I don't believe in the presence of moisture in the air is sufficient reason to overturn society's usual sensible taboo against wielding spiked clubs at eye level. From the edge of the playground, near where the respectful fox had stood, they could see over the school's walls into the street where a few people passed by. Something caught Zeba's eye. something strange and unclear. By a playing field at the end of the street, smudges were just visible on the road. "Something's there," Zanna said. She squinted. "I think it's moving." "Is it?" said Deeba. The sky seemed unnaturally flat, as if a gray sheet had been pegged out from horizon to horizon above them. The air was still. Very faint, dark stains coiled and disappeared, and the road was unmarked again. "Today," Deeba said, "is not a normal day." Zanna shook her head. Birds arced. A clutch of sparrows flew out of nowhere and circled Zanna's head in a twittering halo. That afternoon they had French. Zanna and Deeba were not paying attention. They were staring out of the windows, drawing foxes and sparrows and rain clouds, until something in Miss Williams' droning made Zanna look up. "Choice," she heard. "Je suis tout choisi." "What's she on about?" Deeba whispered. "Nous allons choisir," Miss Williams said. "Vous avez choisi, miss?" "Miss?" said Zanna. "What was that last one, miss? What does it mean?" Miss Williams poked the board. "This one? Vous avez choisi. Vous, you, plural. Avez, have. Choisi, chosen. Choisi, choisi, chosen." At the end of the day, Deeba and Zanna stood by the school gate and looked out at where they had seen the marks. It was still drizzling, and by the playing fields, the rain looked to be falling as if against resistance, as if it had hit a patch of odd air. "You coming to Rose's?" Kath and the others were standing behind them. "We thought we saw something," Deeba said. "We were just going to..." Her voice petered out as she followed Zanna. Behind them, a scrum of their classmates were rushing by, heading home or meeting their parents. "What were you looking for?" said Keisha. She and Kath stood watching quizzically as Zanna stood in the middle of the road a few meters away, looking around. "I can't see nothing," she whispered. Zanna stood for a long time as the others huffed impatiently. "All right, then," she said, raising her voice. Kath had her arms folded and one eyebrow raised. "Let's go." The stream of their classmates had ended. A few cars emerged from the gates and swept past them as their teachers headed home. The little group of girls were alone in the street. With a sputtering crack, the streetlights came on as the sky darkened. Rain was coming down hard, like a typewriter on Deeba's umbrella. "Don't know what she's doing," Deeba heard Beck say to Keisha and Kath. Zanna walked a little ahead of them, her feet sending up little sprays of rain-like mist. A lot like mist. A dark mist. Zanna slowed. She and Deeba looked down. "What now?" said Keisha in exasperation. At their feet, a few centimeters above the dirty, wet tarmac, there was a layer of coiling smoke. "What is that?" said Kath. Wafts were rising from the gutters. The smoke was a horrible, dirty dark. It emerged in drifts and tendrils, reaching through the metal grills of the drains like growing veins or octopus legs. Ropes of it tangled and thickened. They coiled around the wheels of vehicles and under their engines. "What's going on?" whispered Keisha. Smoke was beginning to boil out of the sewers. A smell of chemicals and rot thickened in the air. Far off and muffled as if by a curtain, the noise of a motor was audible. Zanna was standing with her arms out, focusing intensely into sudden fumes that circled them. For a second, it looked as if the rain that was pelting them was evaporating, like drops on hot metal, a few millimeters above Zanna's head. Deeba stared, but dark drifts hid her friend. The motor was louder. A car was approaching. The girls were shrouded in gritty smoke. They spluttered in panic and tried to call each other. They could see almost nothing. The noise of the motor grew, and glints of reflected street lamplight winked momentarily through the fumes. "Wait a minute," Zanna shouted. Through the fog, headlights suddenly flared, heading straight for Zanna. Deeba saw her, turned into a shadow, sidestepping neatly as the lights bore down, her hands seeming to glow. "It's my dad!" Zanna shouted, and moved as fast as the car raced into the smoke. There was a rush of fumes that dissipated, and there was a bang. And something went flying. Then there was silence. The clouds undarkened and the rain stopped. The strange fumes dropped out of the air and flooded like thick, dark water back into the gutters, gushing soundlessly out of sight. For several seconds, no one moved. A car was skewed across the road, with Zanna's dad sitting in the front seat looking confused. Someone was shouting hysterically. Someone fair was lying by a wall. "Zanna!" Deeba shouted, but Zanna was beside her. It was Bex who had been hit, who lay motionless. "We have to get her to a doctor," said Zanna, pulling out her mobile and starting to cry, but Kath was already through to 999. Zanna's dad staggered out of the car, coughing. "What?" he said. What happened?" He saw Bex. "Oh, God!" He dropped to his knees beside her. "What did I do?" He kept saying. "I've called an ambulance," Kath said, but he wasn't listening. Now the light was back to normal. There was no fog lapping at ankle height, people peering out of doors and windows. Bex moved uneasily and made groggy, moaning noises. "What happened?" Zanna's dad kept asking them. None of them knew what to say. "I don't remember anything," he said. "I just woke up and it hurts," Beck wailed. "Did you see?" Zanna whispered to Deeba. Her voice sounded as if it was cracking. "The smoke, the car, everything. It was all thick around me. It was trying to get at me." And that is where we will end off today. I do hope you enjoyed the Teen Talk Tuesday for the Juliet Hampton Morgan Memorial Library. If you'd like to learn more about China Miéville's Lun Dun, we have several copies available throughout the Montgomery City County Public Library system, available for checkout. I do personally recommend this book, and I think it would be a fun read for anyone who's looking for something a little bit unchosen. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the show.